Hello and welcome back to Random Librarian here on YouTube. Today we are going to be talking about what I read in the month of June, so for Pride Month. I actually had a really great reading month. I think I'm going to try and do like themed months going forward. It really helped me read more than usual for both the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month in May and the Pride Month in June. So maybe next month it'll be, I don't know, just like books that I need to finish or like books that I've told people I would read next, because I definitely have a lot of those, but that's neither here nor there. That is another video in and of itself. Let's get into what I read for Pride. Alright, so let's start with the physical books. I started off the month so strong with Raybearer by Jordan Ufueko, and this is a book that I have been meaning to read for such a long time because it seems like everyone who reads it absolutely adores it. And I picked it up for Pride Month because it has Ace Rep in it. It's a lot of the background characters who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, but one of the main characters has a moment where they're talking about being Ace and just feeling like they're forced to create babies essentially, and if they have to have sex with someone, they like force themselves to do it with the person that they trust the most, which is really heartbreaking, and I hope it does get explored more in the sequel, just because we got a glimpse of it in this book and it was really powerful in my opinion, and I hope that we get more of it in book 2. That being said, in addition to having Ace Rep, the story is just absolutely incredible. The twists and turns that happen here, up until the very last page, the world building is exquisite. All of the characters have flaws and very much need to be protected from their families and from the world at large. So all told, I am joining the ranks of people who highly recommend this book. Also, this edition. This is I think the UK edition, and I had tried to buy a copy in like December, and it got lost in the mail, or I guess the post if we're gonna be British. And then I got my hands on a copy earlier last month, I think, and it's just stunning. I am probably going to give away most, if not all, of these books that I'm going to be talking about on Bookstagram, so keep an eye out for that if any of these sound interesting to you. Let's see, what did I read after that? So after Raybearer, I decided to take to the stars and read An Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon. So this has been on my shelf for a full year, I think, after reading and loving The Deep. I am a huge fan of River Solomon. Their work is just absolutely beyond. Just beyond. It's incredible. I have their third book, so I'm probably gonna read that this month. We'll see. I have the audiobook on hold at the library so I can read and listen at the same time. I know that on Book Talk people talk about how there's people who visualize and have the movie playing in their mind and there's people who don't, but I think I kind of fall in the middle in that at first I'm reading, and then if I get past that first like initial hurdle, then I see the story in my head, and listening to the audiobook really helps me get past that moment a little bit quicker. So this book is so unique, just absolutely and incredibly unique. It is a space odyssey kind of a situation. Our main character Aster lives on a ship that took them from Earth, and they're trying to get to their next planet, and it's the Matilda. And the HSS Matilda is organized like the antebellum South, which you would hope that if we got to the point of having spaceships that could transport entire societies, that society would not be based on the antebellum South, but that's neither here nor there. So Aster is a low-decker, which means that she works the fields and goes through a lot of trauma at the hands of the guards and upper deckers, and yeah, this is a very heavy read as well. I would say check the trigger warnings for sure, but I think it's so worth it. So, from the Intellectual Freedom blog of the Office of Intellectual Freedom of the American Library Association, Rivers Solomon did an interview with them when this book first came out, and they spoke about the difficulty of applying contemporary labels to the characters, because we have characters who could be seen as trans, intersex, non-binary, asexual, but we're so far in the future, we're in space, and we don't really comply with what we currently understand about gender and sexuality. Rivers Solomon says, Aster is an intersex butch lesbian, but maybe agender. Theo is a non-binary trans woman. These are my interpretations, but arguments can certainly be made for other classifiers. Part of the beauty of avoiding labels, to me, is that it's saying identities aren't sacrosanct. To me, they're not objective truths or innate biological realities. Rather, they're part of the way we choose to interpret ourselves as a vast network of information and social relationships. So we also have autistic rep, in that Aster herself is an autistic main character. So there's a lot of really great rep going on here, because of course there is. Rivers Solomon can do no wrong in my eyes. And the story is so good because there's a mystery of what's going on with the ship. There's the mystery of what happened to Aster's mom. She's also helping Theo, who's our other main character, and also best friend slash love interest for Aster, who is the surgeon of the ship, and they use he, him pronouns for Theo, but Theo doesn't feel like a man, so there's also that complication that I don't know what pronouns to use to speak about Theo. I'm going to go with what was used in the work and just say he, him for this review, but just know that there's a complication there. So Theo has his own standing within the hierarchy. He is an upper decker. He was born to the previous, like, ruler is like a loose word to use there, of the ship, and has some hidden things there as well, and everything is just very intricate, and I highly recommend this book if you can't tell by how much I'm talking about it, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move along to what I read next. So the next book I read is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, which I picked up on publication day because it came out on a Tuesday, and that is the day that I am in Boston, and just popped into my local, I guess, Barnes & Nobles and found it on a new desk. I am obsessed with the fact that it is a floppy paperback and came out that way. I very much wish that more books came out in paperback form, because this is how I prefer to read. So you've probably heard all about One Last Stop because Casey McQuiston has become an auto by author for many people just based off of Red, White, and Royal Blue. This time, there's no politics involved, which was kind of great, I'm not gonna lie. Some of the lines in Red, White, and Royal Blue did not age well, to say the least. And One Last Stop takes place in New York City with, I almost called her Autumn, because Autumn at the Literary Heroine on Bookstagram really loves this book, but August is in her last year of college. She's been transferred a whole bunch of times. She's a very smart cookie, but she doesn't really necessarily know what she wants her place to be yet, so she's dealing with questions of identity and also with becoming her own person, because a lot of her childhood was spent helping her mom in her quest to find her missing older brother. So August's uncle, who she was named after, and it's kind of in her blood to be a detective, or like a, what's the word for a detective if you're not licensed? Kind of Veronica Mars vibes, which is very fun, I'm not gonna lie. And on her first day on her way to class, she meets a girl on a train named Jane, and kind of immediately falls in love with her, which I normally hate insta-love, but this was done really, really well. It was a very cute first meeting. August dumps coffee all over herself because she's clumsy. I very much relate. And it's just a very fun read. And it takes the story to unexpected places because there's some time travel, there's some examination of like LGBTQIA plus history. I really loved it, and I think a lot of people did too. It's not without its flaws, but I think that it's still very much a good book. And then of course there was also some discourse on Book Talk about one person who decided to be very queerphobic or lesbian phobic and decided to DNF this book specifically because they were lesbians and she couldn't relate to them and wasn't attracted to them. But we don't hold with that on this channel. I don't believe many people do. So that was a bad take. Next up, after this one, I decided to finally pick up If They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This is my first Adam Silvera book, and I'm like already tearing up just thinking about this book. I loved it so much, and even with the warning of the title, and when I bought this, the bookseller was like, you know that that's not a joke, right? Like, that is true. They do both die at the end. Don't take up this book lightly. And I was like, okay, thank you for taking care of me in this way. I still want to read it. It's so good. It's so good, but I don't think I've ever sobbed more at the end of a book. Like, I couldn't breathe, and the next day I had given myself a dehydration headache. It's just beautiful though. Like, it's so good, and there's so much that's left unresolved at the end, which I was, not gonna lie, very upset about, because I want to know what happens with everyone else. Like, I want these characters to be okay. All of their friends who are essentially their family, I want them to be okay. It hurts my heart that Mateo and Rufus are not okay. They died at the end. I'm just gonna read what I wrote on Instagram. Sorry. So this is a book about death, but it also shines a spotlight on the best of living. The friendships in this book are just as, if not more important than the love story. The families Mateo and Rufus have built for themselves and the ways they honor and support one another made my heart grow bigger than the Grinch's. The missed connections and what could have beens and peeks into other stories of the people who would die at the end and the others who would outlive them. It was all just really fucking beautiful. So, I highly recommend this book. I also would recommend that you hydrate even more than I did. And I hydrated a lot for this book. If you're going to pick it up. And just be careful, and then come find me if you need a hug afterwards. So, they both die at the end. After they both die at the end, I really needed something that was just quick and easy and light and wouldn't hurt me. So I picked up Her Royal Highness. This book was exactly what I needed after having my heart so thoroughly broken. It takes place in a Scottish boarding school where our main character Millie gets paired up with a roommate, and their first meeting is very standoffish. It seems like we are off to the worst of all possible starts, and slowly they start becoming friends, they start understanding each other more, and eventually, of course, they fall in love. My one anger with this book is that, so at the end, this much at the end, it's like a good chunk of pages. This is an excerpt from the companion novel called Prince Charming. So I got to the point when they say, "I love you," and afterwards there is at most a page left. So I got none of the happy ever after. I'm just supposed to imagine, like, I understand people fade to black for, like, spicy scenes in teen books, but you're gonna fade to black on their entire lives? What? Anyways, that was my one gripe with this book because it's actually very sweet, very quick read. I do recommend it as long as you know going in that you're going to be kind of annoyed with how they handle that. The next physical book I picked up was Labyrinth Lost, and this is very fun. I am not going to lie. So we have our main character who is a witch, I'm sorry, a bruja. Alex is the most powerful of her family. She's like a once in a generation kind of power, and she doesn't want any part of it. So in her mind, her dad left because of her powers, so she's been suppressing them basically since she was a child. And as she's getting her coming of age ceremony, she decides to tweak the magic a little bit to try and get rid of all of her powers, and then her family poofs out of existence. So she has to go on this quest through this otherworldly realm in order to save them, and she goes on this quest with a brujo that she meets at a magic shop, which is just like the perfect place to start something. And then her very human best friend went to go check on her and saw that she like jumped through the portal, so the best friend jumped through the portal after her. I love them so much. So we have a bisexual main character and two love interests. I'm not gonna say more than that because I do want you to read it and just fall in love with the love story. Very, very fun. I think where I was describing this on Instagram, I said it felt like the original Charmed TV show mixed with Cemetery Boys, and like if Gods of Jade and Shadow was the godmother of this baby, and his Dark Materials was the godfather. So that's a very interesting mix of things. Next up for physical books was another thing to make me cry because I thought two books had made me better. So this is the Song of Achilles. Again, it's probably something you've heard of. It is a reimagining of the story of Achilles, which takes place in the Trojan War. And Achilles is the best of the Greeks in terms of fighting. He's a demigod, and it's that story but told from the point of view of Patroclus, who is Achilles' childhood friend, soulmate, and companion through life, essentially. And even knowing everything that happens in that story, I was very much a Greek myth kid, it still got me. I really enjoy Madeline Miller's writing style. I really liked Circe, and I think that this one is just slightly better because it's not from the perspective of someone who has all of these powers. It's from the perspective of someone who in any other story would just be a background character. Ugh, Patroclus deserves the world. Achilles deserves better parents. I wish they could have just stayed with, is it Chiron? I wish they could have just stayed with Chiron. I would read an entire novel of them just being happy. It's also a lot of like that whole idea of pride comes before the fall. And I didn't cry as much as I was expecting, I'm not gonna lie. But you get to the last couple of pages, and that's when it really got me, and I just had a wet face instead of cannot breathe, gasping, sobbing. I think you only really get one of those a month, and they both die at the end. Got me more. But that's the Song of Achilles. The next physical book that I picked up was Upside Down by N.R. Walker. This was recommended to me by two people on Bookstagram. I'm of two minds when it comes to this book because I absolutely love the story and the characters and the love story as depicted between two ace characters because I think we need more of that. And I loved the like found families, and then there's people who have good relationships with their families and how important friendship is. There's also a twist near the end that brought everyone together, and I loved that a lot. There's an ace support group, so there's talk about asexuality and the spectrum of asexuality and how that exists and is valid, and all of that is beautiful, deserves an entire series. However, the writing style really wasn't for me. It's been a while since I've had an author introduce me to a character and give me a head-to-toe rundown of what they look like and what they're wearing. So that style just really isn't for me. I'm probably not going to pick up another N.R. Walker book for a good while. But like I said, it's important to me because there's the ace storyline and it's an ace romance, which I don't really think I've seen very much. Also, librarian main character. It's something I love. We're down to the last two of the physical books, and then I'll move on to the ebooks and audiobooks and include the cover somewhere on screen. So next up, I read Freshwater. This is such an interesting book to me because it's beautifully written. It's extremely unique, as I'm sure everyone who's read it knows, but I'm also not sure I'm smart enough to fully get all of the meaning packed into this very thin novel. So, our main character is Ada, or Ada. I think it's Ada, because I listened to the audiobook and that's how they pronounced it. And she's born with gods inside of her. Or like otherworldly things. So she's multi-faceted, almost, like, because they segment her. She's also possibly asexual, but one of the beings inside of her is not. And one of the beings inside of her is male. And I think they transition to be more non-binary throughout the whole novel, especially towards the end. But they also very much eschew labels, really. So it says she's born with one foot on the other side. That's the quote on the back. And it just kind of follows Ada's life as she goes from a child who didn't really know how to explain what they were experiencing and didn't also probably didn't really know that it was different than what others were experiencing, in a very fractured home, to growing up largely without her mom in the same country, moving to the United States, going through a lot of violence and trauma, and figuring out how all of the consciousness within her is going to live in this world and also pass to the beyond when it's time, and become divine, I think, by the end of the novel. I'd love for someone... I'm gonna go looking for reviews on this to kind of understand a little bit more, just because, like I said, I'm not sure that I'm smart enough or well-versed enough in spiritual matters to fully get what happened here. But I did very enjoy it. I did very much enjoy it, I guess that's the better way to say it. Lastly, for the physical books, I read All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I love the back. So this is a memoir written in a style for young adults, and it really covers some heavy, heavy topics. So I definitely recommend reading it, because I think George's examination of his identity, both in what he felt able to express in different spheres of his life growing up, because he lived in a predominantly black neighborhood, but he attended a private school with mainly white kids, and kind of how he had to navigate doing what he wanted to do and being drawn more towards traditionally feminine things and women as friends, and what he felt he had to present in order to survive. The clearest example of that is that he wanted to play double dutch at every recess with his girlfriends, and ended up kind of being forced to come and play, or not forced because he's very good at it, but ended up needing to play football with the boys in order to make them think that he wasn't gay. And then there's just a lot that happens. He has lived a life. There's a lot of loss, a lot of trauma, but there's also some real love there for both his family and his fraternity brothers, and it's a life in book form, and it's very laid bare for the reader. So just is beautifully written. It very much feels like a conversation with the author, and I really enjoyed it. I am a sucker for a good memoir, and this is a great one. Now on to the digital reads that I did this month. First up, I read Volume 1 and Volume 2 of Check Please, which is a really lovely, sweet, quick graphic novel talking about hockey at college and also a relationship that develops between two of the players. So we follow Biddy, Eric Biddle, who is a YouTube baker. He does vlogs, so some of what we see is him like just direct to camera doing a vlog. Then he grew up in Georgia as a figure skater and changes to hockey for college because there are better scholarships. So he joins the Samwell hockey team, which is a fictional school in Massachusetts. And there he meets this whole cast of wonderful, ridiculous characters led by Captain Jack. Captain Jack Zimmerman. Didn't realize that he was Captain Jack, who is a Canadian phenom, essentially, when it comes to hockey. He is the son of one of the most famous hockey players in this universe, and he had a bit of a overdose or needed to work through some emotional things in order to get back to hockey. So he's taking time off from the NHL in order to go to college and then figure out what happens after that. And it follows them through Biddy's first year of college, which I think is like Jack's second or third, and then goes through all 4 years of Biddy's college career. And the relationship doesn't really take off until book 2 if you're reading them in physical form. It was originally a webcomic, and I'm pretty sure I found it when I was in, I don't know, like middle school, high school. But I'm really bad when it comes to bookmarking things. So I think it was one of those like millions of tabs I had open, and then my computer crashed and I never found it again. So I was reading the first couple of pages just like, this feels really familiar. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, I haven't read this yet. But it was it's a lovely story. It's very sweet. And it involves coming out, one person who has a really easy time coming out to his family and friends, and one who has a bit more of a hard time. But I think part of what I love so much about it is that it is predominantly a happy story. It deals with some heavy things, but it's very happy and upbeat and sweet. The next graphic novel I picked up is called Bingo Love, and this was a very quick read set between two women of color in a small town who fell in love in a bingo hall, essentially. This was also an example of insta-love, but that I actually really enjoyed. The story of these two women, and as they're teenagers is when they meet, then they get caught in their relationship and one of them gets forced away. So there's this long time where they have this whole life and they've both gotten married and have children, and then the one who is forced away moves back and they find each other in the same bingo hall. And it's their love story after that. It's like a second chance at being with your soulmate. Again, I would say check trigger warnings, because there's also, in addition to like homophobia and forced separation, there is also an Alzheimer's storyline, which is upsetting. So I do recommend it, but not as much as the other things that I have read this month. The next thing I read is The Witch Boy by Molly Ostertag, and I don't think it's explicitly stated in this book what anyone's sexualities are. It's more just a pushback against gender roles, but I absolutely loved it, and I'm going to continue on with it. So The Witch Boy follows Aster in a middle grade graphic novel telling of his family, who's made up of witches and shapeshifters. The women are always witches, the men are always shapeshifters, except for in the shadowy past, where their matriarch had a brother who wanted to be a witch and was forced to be a shapeshifter and therefore became evil. And that is the premise. It goes from there. Aster wants to be a witch and keeps like sneaking into trees where the girls are doing their magic studies, or sitting in a window and trying to take all of the notes. And his male cousins are not about that either, because they think he should be like them, because they're very comfortable in their shape-shifting ways. And Aster also leaves at one point and makes a friend with a girl who lives in a neighboring town, and she's wonderful. I love her so much, because she lets Aster be who he is, and he immediately shows her magic, which I feel like he probably shouldn't have. But it's also a very interesting setup, because it kind of feels like the family is a little bit of a magic cult in the woods, and meeting someone who's like not judging him for that and like willing to be his friend is just very sweet. So I am looking forward to reading the rest of this series. So I'm excited to see where it goes from there. After that, I picked up Volume 1 and Volume 2 of My Brother's Husband, which is a graphic novel that takes place in Tokyo, where Yaichi is a stay-at-home dad taking care of his daughter. He is divorced from her mom, and all of a sudden a huge Canadian named Mike shows up on their front step, saying that he was married to Yaichi's deceased identical twin brother. It is very much an interesting portrayal, and I'm sure it's realistic, of the discrimination that LGBTQIA plus people still face in Japan, which is not something I ever would have known about. So there is a bit of a compare and contrast between Mike, who's Canadian, so the North American way of being and way of accepting, which still has a long way to go, I know, but he's very close with his family. His family came to his wedding with Ryoji, and Yaichi has to kind of go through and try to work against his own internalized prejudices that he didn't even really realize he was holding, because he just assumed that he was like, oh, we've just grown apart. It's like the story he told himself about his relationship with his brother, but his brother traced it back to when he came out, and so does Yaichi eventually. And he starts thinking, what if eventually my daughter wants to be with a woman? I see nothing wrong with that, and he's like, I see nothing wrong with that because I love her, and it's very much based in like it's the person you know, and when you know someone who's of a different identity than you, their identity becomes much more understandable and much more something you would fight someone over. And I don't know, I really thought it was thoughtful and well done. It's a heavy rumination on grief, in addition to just being a examination of what it means to be out and gay and discovering your identity. There's a lot of different conversations, not just within the family, but with other characters in the neighborhood and other people who knew Ryoji. And I really enjoyed it. I do have to say that I completely thought it was a different story. So the cover that I've seen in bookstores, I thought it was the two men were married and the daughter was the sister. I don't know where I got this, but I thought the parents had had a child very late in life and they passed and needed the much older brother to adopt the daughter with his husband. So I very much had a different story in mind that took some adjusting to, but I did very much enjoy the graphic novels. The next book that I read is finally back in stock, which I am so excited about. They're doing another reprinting of this book. It was out of print for what felt like the longest time, as long as I've known about it and wanted to read it. And that is Peter Darling by Austin Chant. Oh my god. I said this on Book Talk because it very much feels like the perfect book for that community, because at least the part of Book Talk that I'm on, everyone seems to be obsessed with adult Disney retellings and the enemies to lovers trope. And Peter Darling follows Peter Pan coming back to Neverland after living his life as Wendy and like making himself much smaller and compliant with what his parents want of him, not knowing, not understanding, because it's England and the whatever, not understanding that Peter is a boy and he needs to transition. So he goes back to Neverland, and it's really one of the only places he's been able to really be himself because of the magic of Neverland. It lets him be Peter fully. And it goes into Hook and the Lost Boys, and I wasn't expecting it to be so deep, but it really is. And we also have everyone's favorite, like, dagger to throat kind of thing, and they end up having to work together and figure out why each person came to Neverland, and it's beautiful. Oh my gosh, I want everyone to read this book. It was so good. Next up was The Times I Knew I Was Gay by Eleanor Cruz, and this is graphic memoir about someone coming to terms with their sexual identity. Love the drawing style. Thought it was really good, but memoir. Doesn't go as deep as something like All Boys Aren't Blue, but I still very much enjoyed it. After that, I read Taproot, which was a very sweet love story between a ghost and the gardener who can see him. It does get a little bit more complicated than that, but it was really quick read, really beautiful. Then I read Witchlight, which is a graphic novel between a witch who needs to find part of her magic and the woman that she kidnaps to help her along her way and teach her how to sword fight. And they basically travel the country getting into witch fights as like a way of making money and a way of touching base with the magical community and seeing if any of them know where this missing piece of her magic is. The magic in this is really interesting because witches are marked with like a candle that floats above their head. The companion is part of a very gendered family, and her brothers and her dad are very anti-witch. So there is underlying kind of like political things. There's also a whole backstory about how our witch's family was completely wiped out. So I would say check trigger warnings. So it's set in a fantasy world. So fantasy violence, fantasy genocide, fantasy war, fantasy magic. Quick read. Very enjoyable. Beautiful art style. Then I read another book from Molly Ostertag. This is her newest, which is called The Girl from the Sea, which I loved. Absolutely loved. So a Selkie, which is my favorite type of sea creature, if we're gonna be honest, she has met our main character before, the last time she was able to shed her skin. So we have a Selkie named Kelty, and she meets Morgan, who's our main human character, when Morgan was bridge jumping with her brother and her dad. So this was when they were much younger, like 7 to 9 or something like that. And now Morgan is 15, she has a secret, and she really just wants to wait to escape from her tiny island hometown in order to go and actually be herself somewhere else. She and Kelty have this moment on the rocks because Morgan falls off. She thinks she's hallucinating or dreaming. So she's like, if it's a dream, this is a very romantic dream. And they kiss, and Kelty shows up the next day with legs, and she's like, it's true love! Ta-da! And Morgan's like, shit, I don't want anyone to know that I like girls. So there's a lot of hijinks that go on. The hijinks that are complicated by the fact that Morgan's dead, and mom just got divorced. Her brother is taking that very hard, and Morgan's friends are interesting. They don't know the real Morgan, and one of her friends is like extremely rich and is throwing a huge birthday party on her new boat, the charted path of which is going to destroy the home island of Kelty's seal family. So there's a lot going on in this very short, very sweet romance, but I did really appreciate that Kelty could be the catalyst for Morgan's change, for Morgan to realize that she wanted to start being herself now in her hometown as opposed to waiting and having this grand plan for the future. But Kelty didn't magically fix all of Morgan's problems. So I thought, despite having a Selkie involved in this love story, it was surprisingly realistic. Definitely recommend. The next thing I read wrecked me. I listened to it on audiobook through Libby, and that is Darius the Great Is Not Okay. The examination of mental health and depression and finding your place in your family or your community and having like this split identity between where you were raised and where your family is from. Oh my god, hit me right in the chest. Listening to the last like part of it, I was just inconsolable, really. Not quite to the level of they both die at the end, but definitely at the level where I needed full bottles of water to make sure I didn't give myself another dehydration headache. Because Darius and his dad have this one conversation because they've both been kind of thinking the worst, not necessarily the worst, but not thinking well of each other and being jealous of certain aspects and not putting how much they love each other first and foremost. And Darius also has it fit for Pride Month because it's hinted that he's gay or at least attracted to other boys, and it's something that really doesn't get focused on much in this book. I have the second one on hold, so I'm really excited for that to come out. But it was kind of this thing that he was just not talking about, not examining, and it's kind of there, and I think the start of a love story is there, but it's much more focused on his relationship with his family, both his family that he lives with in the United States, so his like nuclear family, and his grandparents and his cousins and all of these people that he meets when they go back to his mother's hometown in Iran. I also just really appreciated how wonderfully geeky he is. His dad and he have a nightly routine where they watch Star Trek. So, like, for example, it starts, the blurb on the back of the book starts, Darius Kellner speaks better Klingon than Farsi, and he knows more about Hobbit social cues than Persian ones. I love him. I love him so much. All of the food that they describe also, and the tea, makes me want all of it. So all in all, I kind of feel like this is a perfect book. And I'm so excited to read book 2. Next up, I read volume 1 and volume 2 of a manga called 7 Days. And I think that this was the book that inspired Date Me Bryson Keller. I could be wrong. And it starts with, there's this one boy at the school who is like the most attractive, I don't even know if charismatic's the right word, but just like the best boy, like everyone wants to date him. And every week he'll say yes to the first person to ask him out, and he'll date them for a week, and at the end of that week, if he hasn't fallen in love with them, he breaks up with them by telling them that. And kind of on a whim, one of the older boys of the archery club, because they're both in the archery club, says, like, asks him out. And it's an interesting story, and it's two people falling in love, which is always fun to read. I don't know if the translation was super good, or if it was just kind of stilted. So I haven't rated it yet on Goodreads or the Storygraph. I just am sitting with it. Because it was, you know, a story that has inspired others, apparently. I also read Thirsty Mermaids by Kat Leigh, who is the creator of Snapdragon, which I absolutely loved. So Thirsty Mermaids is definitely an aged up story. I wouldn't recommend it for people who read and loved Snapdragon necessarily, because it opens with 3 mermaids who want to go to land because they have run out of beer to drink, or whiskey to drink, from a crashed ship. So one of the mermaids has magic, and she gives them legs, and they go up and find a bar, and there are some serious hijinks because they don't understand how money works or how jobs work or anything along those lines. They do get rescued by just an amazing character, all told, who takes them home and kind of adopts them and teaches them how to be human, helps them find jobs, and is a very casual trans character. Just comes up in conversation while they're discussing body dysmorphia, because one of the mermaids, like, cannot handle being human. And it seems like it'll just be kind of like a goofy, like, fun story, but it does have some real deep questions and some really deep conversations and some really beautiful found family. So I was very surprised by this one, and I really, really enjoyed it. All told, I had an amazing reading month. I am shocked at how many great books I picked up, and I'd love to hear about what you read. If you've read any of these before, if you read something that you absolutely fell in love with over Pride Month and think that I should pick it up, let me know in the comments down below, and I hope I will see you guys very soon. Bye!